Okay, folks, welcome back to the Contrarians. We're back with another episode. This is our regular edition of the show where one of us is in the hot seat. One of us picks a dark horse album from a band and champions that album against the rest of the discography, while the other individual tells them why they're wrong and what the sober choices are. So today, Martin's in the hot seat again, and we're going with the band Motorhead. And Martin's got a contrarian choice, and I'm going to throw it over to Martin to give us a little history of the band and why he's picking this record.
All right. Thanks, Marco. So yeah, we're talking about Motorhead. And as we always do on this show, just give you a brief history of the band. Obviously, this is a super important band. We can debate whether they're part of the new wave of British heavy metal or not. You know, the first album's in 77. The next album, they put out two albums in 79. The new wave of British heavy metal starts in 80. I always say they are absolutely part of it because they are essentially, a baby band coming into it in a big way in 1979 with the first full color album after the debut. Overkill comes out and that's their second album, but in many ways it's their first. They're on bronze at that point. I did a Motorhead book. This is actually still available at martinpopoff.com. It's a book that is only on the early days of the band. So this is all Filthy Animal Taylor, Lemmy, and Fast Eddie. And this goes up to Iron Fist. But yeah, so the band was, a notorious band, a very power trio with a crazy bass sound. Lemmy obviously came from Hawkwind before. The other two guys are sort of unknowns. They have a surprise hit album in the UK, #1 album with No Sleep Till Hammersmith, the live album. Ace of Spades is really the main thing Motorhead is sort of known for in terms of the wider pop consciousness, maybe that song more than anything. Great album cover on that as well. But later on, obviously, they keep going and they settle into a lineup eventually, which has, Phil Campbell and Mickey D as the drummer. They make lots and lots of records. Lemmy dies, I think it was 2016. So now we're talking 5 years already. But they make lots and lots of records. They never really rise above much of sort of cult status, but they're a pretty big, well-known cult band, quite a brand. They always packed it in anywhere they went on tour, but they kind of got to that large club era of things. But yeah, super heavy band. I've actually often called them or said that the likes of Overkill and Bomber are two of the heaviest albums ever out of the 70s because they're pretty much heavy throughout. They don't do ballads, this band, really. Few here or there. But along the way, early on, they were kind of like uncompromisingly heavy. Here's my copy of Bomber there, signed by Lemmy up there in black, unfortunately. On that, he had a really cool, weird signature. I always tell the story of when I got Bomber. I remember it was either Bomber or the second Damned album, but I think it's Bomber, where I was in the store and I saw that. I was flipping through the racks and I just leapt up and almost hit my head on a wooden beam in the store and let out a yell. And everybody's looking at who's this crazy guy, found a record they wanted. But it was pretty wild seeing Bomber because it's kind of like the really amazing front cover color version of the first front cover, which is just pretty basic in black and white. But yeah, so that's a little bit on Motorhead. Beloved band, a huge cult band. So my choice for a favorite Motorhead album and I'd say pretty truly a contrarian choice is this one right here, Another Perfect Day. So Another Perfect Day, the story of this record, it came out June 4th, 1983. It only got to 153 on the Billboard charts, but no Motorhead album got super, super big. Like I say, I don't think Ace of Spades is even certified gold. I think they have no gold albums in the States. Went to number 20 in the UK, which is fairly high, but not crazy high. Number 31 in Germany, so not even as high as in the UK. The interesting story about this album is that Fast Eddie is gone. He got fed up after Iron Fist, doing all the work, producing, not getting paid to produce and write the songs at the same time, just dealing with Phil and Lemmy. I mean, that whole band, no matter who was dealing with him, was like herding a bunch of cats, right? Although there were only 3 cats. No, Fast Eddie got fed up. He's on his way to Fastway. Puts out an amazing first album with Fastway. Second one, not as great, but the first one's a classic. So Phil Taylor, the drummer, lobbies hard to get, of all people, Brian Robbo Robertson into the band from Thin Lizzy, exiled from Thin Lizzy. He's a bit of a tearaway, as they say, a bit of a roustabout, hard drinking guy. But he comes into the band as the guitarist. So this is pretty different. Here's a guy coming from a pretty clean, clinical, stately band, Thin Lizzy, into the band. What's going to happen? Well, what happens is it's pretty predictable. They make an album that Lemmy kind of says is we became a little more musical, as he puts it, right? But to my mind, this is just a great record, and they don't really change their sound all that much. Brian changes a few things along the way, like for example, the beginning of Dancing on Your Grave and the beginning of I Got Mine. You can hear. There are a few parts here and there where you go, oh dear, what's happening to Motorhead? Where they sound almost like a little southern rock or a little bit too clean picking. But really, this album is just a classic Motorhead album in terms of, it sounds essentially the same complexion as Ace of Spades or Bomber or Iron Fist or Overkill, really, at this point. Brian doesn't change the band that much. There just are a few interesting more licks in there. And what I love about the songs on here is there's a sophistication of the segues between songs. But why I picked this album is I think their production gets better, but it doesn't lose that brutal rawness. You still have Lemmy bass guitar on Stun. It's produced by Tony Platt. They're working at Olympic and Eel Pie. It's the 6th album. It's the last record they make for Bronze as well. It's got that great album cover. But yeah, I Got Mine was the lead single on it. Interesting thing on this, the UK running order matches the CD running order. The US running order is different, even from both of those, or from that and from mine, which is the Canadian running order. So I'm going to tell you in the Canadian running order. I Got Mine was the lead single. That guitar at the beginning freaked everybody out. Everybody thought, well, what had happened to Motorhead? But as I said, things don't really change that much. But great song. The bass sound is awesome. This is almost like their Van Halen Jump that shocked the fans. But it does get heavier when he starts singing, and then even heavier for the chorus. I mean, it's just a standard heavy Motorhead song. Just another general thing before I move on. Why I picked this album also is because it does have a narrative and an atmosphere and a storyline around it. As you get to the later ones, people talk about, I'm going on a little side trip here, but people talk about Bastards as being the first of the great later Motorhead albums. And that's certainly true, but you could pick any of these as great Motorhead albums as well. This is a band I always argue as a band that is kind of making or made eventually even better music than they made in the early days. And I run into a lot of argument with that and a lot of pushback, but they make all these later albums and there's lots of them. And you could say any of those are the greatest Motorhead album. But the point is that there's no real story to them. They're just a collection of songs. And then the next year there's another one, and the next year there's another one. And there's nothing to really sink your teeth into. And it almost feels unfair to point out one of those as my favorite or least favorite, because it's literally just picking like, they go 4 or 5 places that I don't want them to go. So that's the least favorite, or they go mostly places I want to go, so that's my most favorite. No, I wanted to pick something where there is definitely a storyline to what's going on. And that's what I like about this record. It's a one and done. It's an interesting guitar situation, and it sounds great. To get back to the track listing, One Track Mind, I'm not crazy about, but it gets better at the singing part. It's kind of a slow bluesy one. Rocket is not great, but it's okay. It's like one of those fast, shuffly Motorhead things. But hey, the previous albums that everybody calls the classics has a bunch of kind of simple stuff like this on it. And that's kind of the point here too. I think Brian kind of raises the sophistication level a little. Marching Off to War is really cool with a big swaggering riff, up tempo, a lot of atmosphere, great guitar squalls from Brian on this. Tales of Glory is a little boogie woogie, the old Motorhead motor punk kind of thing with that shuffly fill hi-hat beat that he does that nobody else does. It's kind of a unique thing he does on the drums. Side 2, Back at the Funny Farm is my least favorite song on the album. But it's got really cool lyrics. Dancing on Your Grave is amazing. It starts with that kind of southerny rock lick, southern rock sort of lick, but it also gets very heavy. It's kind of like a trick because it starts rocking out quite hard. Great riff, great pre-chorus. Shine, the second single, love it also. It's very Fast Eddie feeling, even though it's Robbo. It's, again, we get that weird shuffly hi-hat thing. Another Perfect Day, another one of my kind of least favorite ones, bluesy Southern kind of one. But here's an interesting case where you go listen to this song. The first verse, the guitar is kind of boring. The second verse, he kind of reinterprets, kind of moves along and does something different. And now all of a sudden it's interesting. So Robbo is a real kind of subtle rule breaker on this album. And then Die You Bastard is one of these very fast punky ones, but it's also got some cool individual sort of note picking from Robbo. It's funny. Lemmy always kind of had it in his mind that everybody hated this album, but over the years, as I would interview Lemmy more and more, there was more of a fondness from Lemmy because that fondness was being reflected because the fans were telling him that's a great Motorhead album. And over time, people really started to like this album, and there's not a lot of detractors anymore. And I think Lemmy, by the end of his life, realized that a lot of people like this album. But again, like I say, for that reason, it's almost like they're Black Sabbath Born Again. It's this cool album that the deep fans really like. And again, Lemmy, the other thing he would always say is he was always a big defender of modern day Motorhead, saying that old stuff sounds ropey. That was the term he would use with me, right? And he's right, because I think if you just on the harsh light of day and you leave out the historical importance of those early classic Fast Eddie albums, I think just as snapshots in time, much of the later Motorhead, you could say, is better than that stuff. But I think Another Perfect Day is also just this subtle improvement with some new bells and whistles added to the game, but it still sounds like brutal, fast, raw. Tony Platt does not take them in a high gloss direction or anything like that. So there you go. That's why I think Another Perfect Day, it's always the first one that comes to mind. When I'm thinking favorite Motorhead albums, it's just I love that one-off story, and we're moving on to Wurzel and Phil and all those things, and then the other ones are a clump, and the early ones are a clump. This is just like this interesting wrinkle in time, yet it's still a very cool classic Motorhead album. Don't fool yourself. There, forget those few little licks. It's a brutal, heavy, awesome Motorhead album. There you go.
You know what? It is wild. You already mentioned it, that like Motorhead doesn't have like a US gold record anywhere. And they don't, according to like at least my research, like they don't have a gold record anywhere, not even like a best of or a compilation, which to me is wild. Because even bands like the Ramones, which don't have a lot of gold records, they had that platinum single with I Want to Be Sedated. And they also have they got like gold and platinum, like best of stuff, but like Motorhead has nothing up and down the line in their discography that's gold, whether it's best of or anything like that. They had stuff that, obviously charted, and they had stuff that was certified in like the UK and stuff like this, but not in the US, which to me is just amazing. Like I couldn't believe that fact. One of the first things I do when we talk about these records that we're going to talk about is I go on Google and I search stuff up and I start doing research. And the very first thing I saw, because normally what I do is I find like lists of albums that are ranked. The first thing that I saw was if you search in like great Motorhead records or Motorhead records ranked, one of the things that Google will suggest is some questions that gets commonly asked. And one of the questions that popped up, it says, people also ask, which is the best album credited to Motorhead? And Google, the answer that they give you is the best album credited to Motorhead is Ace of Spades, which is ranked number 882 in the overall greatest album chart with a total rank of 2,084. So right off the bat, Google answered my question, what's the best Motorhead record? Ace of Spades. I did look through, a handful of rankings lists, and there actually is quite a bit of albums kind of moving up and down the line depending on what list you look at. Usually what you're going to see in the number 1 or 2 spot is usually, from what I saw, was Ace of Spades or Overkill. That doesn't necessarily mean that they ended up on the number 1 spot of each list or number 2 spot of each list. But, we did, I think right before we started recording, I think you mentioned that there was a little bit of some weird stuff going on with the ranking lists there. But I did notice that a lot of albums kind of, jump around from second and then they're 10th on another list, or third and then they're fourth on another list, right? So there's a lot of stuff like that going on. Sea of Tranquility's list, he had number 1, Overkill, 2, Ace of Spades, 3, Bomber, and number 4, Another Perfect Day. So he mentioned the tracks that he liked were Back at the Funny Farm, I Got Mine, Tales of Glory, Die You Bastard. He talks about the guitar playing being really good, talks about the melodic nature, also how it's still really heavy and thrashy. And he also kind of didn't understand all the hate around the record, and probably stated that it might have been the lineup change, that people kind of didn't really get into the record. Ultimate Classic Rock had Ace of Spades at number 1. Basically mentioned that their title track was basically like one of their most infamous tracks ever, and as well as the really cool cover art for the album. Overkill 2, Orgasmatron 3. Another Perfect Day comes in at number 11 on that list, and said that it was polarizing, admitted the loss of Fast Eddie is partly the reason why it ends up in the middle of the pack, so to speak. And admitted that Lemmy himself cited Shine and Dancing on Your Grave as some of Motorhead's best work. So even though they said that this record kind of falls in the middle of the pack because of the loss of Fast Eddie, they mentioned that there's some stuff on there that Lemmy thinks is some of their best stuff that they've ever done. Louder Sound had Ace of Spades in number 1. There's a little doubt that 1980 was a vintage year for hard rock and heavy metal, and this stunner was right up there with the best. They had number 2, Overkill, 3, Bomber, 4, Motorhead, and 5, Another Perfect Day. Again, a lot of the narrative that you see when you look up stuff about this record is Fast Eddie's out, right? And that's one thing that a lot of people you see on every rankings list and reviews and all this stuff. They talk about the different styles between the different guitar players. One of the reviews that I'm going to read for you from AllMusic, I'm going to read you this, and I'm going to see if you think that this is a fair assessment or not. AllMusic review, it's generally favorable, but it cites, clearly a nervous musical marriage from the start. The album captures Motorhead mainstays Lemmy and Filthy Animal Taylor struggling to adapt their raw power and unparalleled distortion to Robertson's more mainstream hard rock instincts and melodic tendencies. Thanks in part to Tony Platt's excellent production, Another Perfect Day ranks among the band's best sounding records ever, but tinkering with a legendary formula is always fraught with danger. Is that a boogie woogie piano and rocket? And as one might expect, the results are alternatively exhilarating and sometimes frustrating. It also went on to state how some of the songs are a little too long or maybe a little too bluesy influenced. But do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think when you do hear that southern rocky sort of stuff, or the meticulous note picking thing, you can almost see Lemmy and Phil going, "What's going on?" sort of thing. But he just fits in so well when he gets to playing the rhythm parts, and like I say, he kind of mixes up the rhythm parts a little. So there's interesting things going on. The other thing I kind of like is that Tony Platt probably captures, if there's anything he's changed a little bit, or is changed with him a little bit, is that the guitar is recorded a little more cleaner, but it's still distorted and powerful. I think he fits in perfectly fine, and I like those slight diversions to it. And yes, there is a little piano tinkle through Rocket. One thing before I forget, I do want to mention, just as a historical note, why there's no other album with Robbo. So number one, Lemmy does talk about how it was absolute torture working with him because he took so long to do his guitar part. So that really made the making of the record unpleasant for the Motorhead guys, because they were more punk oriented and trying to just get the stuff out quick. And Rob took a long time Brian took a long time, Robbo, to do his parts. So they were not used to that. And then, of course, when they went on tour, there's a little bit of the old Graham Bonnet and Richie Blackmore thing where Robbo is this guy with short hair and a headband on, and he wanted to wear shorts on stage and not look metal. And that really upset Lemmy. And then finally, he was a wild guy and a heavy drinker and stuff. And I believe Lemmy has quipped to me the odd time. It's like, I can't believe it, but he was actually too wild for Motorhead, that kind of idea, right? So there's various reasons, and also, you can pack on top of that the critical the critical criticism at the time that Lemmy was taking to heart that this album didn't work. I mean, at the time it was not that well received, this whole thing, and then that's compounded by when they do go on tour and they definitely don't look right on stage. So reviews coming out after that are now subconsciously taking in that visual and saying this album doesn't work, kind of thing. So no, I see some of the criticisms, but I still think it's pretty much unwarranted, that because it is and 90% sounds like a normal Motorhead album, and that other 10% I'm kind of welcoming. It's fine. Any of those lists that rank Motorhead, the first album, super high, are just kind of lying and being like old curmudgeonly people and old school guys, because I would hands down vote the first Motorhead album as the worst of the entire catalog. Although we got to remember there is those Sony years, right? So when you've got kind of your rock and roll, your March and Die, and 1916, I've seen some lists that had 1916 high. I don't think that should be very high either. So that era is possibly the worst because of the Motorhead album has an excitement for 1977, and it deserves the validity of being so raw and weird and recorded badly on purpose, right? That's something that Motorhead kind of pioneered. So when they kind of go commercial, that's actually worse. So again, your March and Die, your rock and roll are probably the worst, but then Motorhead. But any of these later albums, I found it really funny that a lot of the lists would have. They kind of do it's almost like they're doing their homework, or they're just being random about it. You never know. But if you really, really listen super, super carefully, it's an exercise and a challenge that would be worth doing, like seeing which of those albums actually are super great and which ones are maybe not so great. But they're basically all of a super high quality. Motorhead is literally, I think, almost the gold standard band, period, out of all these bands that I think made a lot of their best music later rather than earlier, and the earlier stuff is just overrated because it's classic and it's from that time. But I mean, even Ace of Spades, if in the harsh light of day someone went through track by track by track and compared that record to Another Perfect Day, I think you'd find there's not a lot of reason to laud it higher than Another Perfect Day. So there you go.
One of the things I did notice about the lists that is interesting is, I mean, like, this is a Contrarian show and you are picking a record that is Contrarian. One thing I noticed was that out of all the lists that I looked at, and I looked at more than I even listed there, but like Another Perfect Day never cracked the top 3. It was either like number 4. It came in number 4 on a lot of lists, and then it came in at like number 10 or 11 on a lot of lists, right? So, but it never cracked that top 3. The 2 records you always saw juggling between 1 and 2 were Ace of Spades and Overkill. And I mean, it's hard to argue with, like you had mentioned, the classicness of some of the tracks on those records, right? Ace of Spades, obviously, that's one of the, probably the most infamous Motorhead track ever. And that record had Shoot You in the Back, Jailbait, Bite the Bullet. Like, there's some really good stuff on that one. Overkill had amazing guitar and bass, double bass drums, killer riffs. The title track is killer on that one. Damage Case was really good. Like Limb from Limb, I Won't Pay Your Price. Like, there's some really cool stuff on that one too. I wasn't offended at all by Another Perfect Day. I thought it was great. Like, I thought the opening track was really cool, right? Funny Farm was really cool. So there's some really cool stuff on there. And I didn't think it was that far, other than I do agree with that review that, like, when you look at the track listing and like the length of the tracks, if you look at like Ace of Spades and Overkill, and then you compare the length of the tracks on that one to Another Perfect Day, you do see on Another Perfect Day tracks are like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, like whatever, right? But so I did notice that they were trying to do some stuff. They were getting maybe a little more sophisticated in their arrangements, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't find anything like offensive about this record. But yeah,
Marco,
other than that,
I want to make a point though. It's funny. You think of the songs Overkill and Ace of Spades. Let's look at just Ace of Spades, for example.
Okay.
If you went to a super deep Motorhead fan that sensibly said Ace of Spades is their greatest album, if you ask them what the greatest song on that album is, they'd probably say Ace of Spades. Now think of the verse of that song in your head. It's one chord. It's one chord forever. And then it goes, da, 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 da.
It's quality, not quantity. That's the only thing I can say.
That's my point. Those songs are, and the slow ones are the same way. They're simple as well. So there's not a lot of, there's not as much action going on those early albums as there is on Another Perfect Day, or certainly the later stuff. Like there are so many neat fills and interplay riffs and pre-choruses and breaks and unison things going on, that just kind of like polish and thought put into them that aren't on those. That, obviously, as I say, there's a magic to being first and being there and breaking records and all that kind of stuff, right? And recording like that, being the first band to ever kind of do that outside of maybe a punk environment, the Damned maybe, right? It goes Damned, goes Motorhead, it goes Venom, it goes Bathory, it goes black metal, maybe Nirvana, Bleach, whatever, like this idea of recording badly on purpose, right? But one other point I wanted to make, Bomber is an interesting one. Bomber is almost like the band's AC/DC Power Age or Rush Caress of Steel. It's this little dark horse thing in the middle that has a lot of charm to it, right? Bomber, when it came out, got a little bit of stick for being not as aggressive and attacking as Overkill was. But I would put those three almost tied, Overkill, Bomber, and Ace of Spades. They'd come in probably more or less next. But again, if I was in a fighting spirit, I'd go play some of those later albums and it would all be interleafed right in there, right? But Bomber is a kind of an interesting one. It was considered a tiny bit of a letdown, a little bit of also like a Judas Priest point of entry, right? Just that little bit, kind of the same thing again, but not as great as Bomber was. So that's a funny one. But yeah, I don't know. That's probably all I more or less have to. Anything else coming up? How about live stuff?
I got two more points. So so it wasn't just critics, it wasn't just ranking lists. So in terms of like what the band thought about the album, Another Perfect Day on Setlist FM ranked 11th. If you include covers, so they have different categories. So usually it's albums, and then they'll have like a category of like covers or something like this. Mm-hmm. So it was ranked number 11th as most represented album live. Of course, number one was Overkill, with I think Overkill was represented 4,733 times live. Ace of Spades was number two with 2,967 times live, and 1916 was actually number three with 1,992 representations live. So I guess that every track that was played live, they take the statistics and then they kind of give you this list. Also, the best of Motorhead. Now there's a bunch of compilations, so I didn't look at every single one and take all the statistics. But the best of Motorhead from 2000 was one of their more successful compilation records. It had no representation from Another Perfect Day. The most representation was from Overkill, had 5 tracks on that best of, which pretty much shows that like you could put a Motorhead best of record out there and not even have anything from Another Perfect Day, and people might not even notice that, because this was one of their more successful ones, and that came out in 2000.
Yeah.
Couple of critic reviews, user reviews. So like we don't just go with critic reviews, we don't just go with critic rankings, we go also with users and fans. So Ranker, which basically takes fan voting, had Another Perfect Day at 10, Overkill at 1, Ace of Spades at 2, and Bomber at 3. Bomber I saw at number 3 quite a bit. Bomber fell in that number 3, 4, and 5 pretty consistently. Couple of user reviews from Encyclopedia Metallum. I'll just go through these really quickly. These were mixed reviews. I didn't find any overtly negative reviews about this record from users, but these were kind of like, I like some of it, but I didn't like some of it. So the first one that I found says, I hate its ugly album artwork, and songs like Shine or the meandering title track do not give me much, albeit they are not truly bad. However, they leave somewhat a stale taste, lack inspiration to a certain extent, and show a pretty powerless overall picture. Nevertheless, Another Perfect Day has its moments, like One Track Mind. Another Perfect Day has the aura of a used car. Even though it appears as more or less well-maintained vintage vehicle, these cars are symbols of a time that have gone by, and we do not want to drive them every day. Another user review said it's much softer and melody driven than anything I've heard from Motorhead. While this works on some tracks, it sounds very out of place on others. While Phil Lynnett's emotional delivery and poetic songwriting Robo's idea of rock based on sweet melodies worked well, but Lemmy has a different kind of emotion to his voice and a different ideology behind his band. Dancing on Your Grave is where the clash of styles is most problematic to my ears. It is driven by a very sugary, poppy melody, which sounds like it could have been a Poison song. This doesn't sound good at all, especially with Lemmy singing over it. One of the very few Motorhead songs I can't listen to. Average release, lots of failed experiments.
Interesting. Yeah, that one does have that riff that sticks out like a sore thumb, but technically Lemmy doesn't sing over that riff. That's between the things that he does on that. But yeah, and I got to mention, just seeing number or 1916 come up, that to me is their Black Sabbath Headless Cross in a way. Like, I just don't get the love for Headless Cross. A lot of people like that as a album from that era, and I think it's atrocious sounding. I think it's a terrible Cozy Powell performance as well. But a lot of people like that album, and obviously a lot of people like 1916 too.
I'm glad you
almost like
that.
Yeah,
just because when the Contrarians put out the worst album edition of Motorhead, and it was mentioned that 1916 could have been in contention, with March or Die was the worst album that was picked by the Contrarians. We got a lot of comments of people saying that 1916 was one of their favorites or one of the best, or should not have been considered one of the worst. Yeah. So I'm glad that you had mentioned that and kind of brought that up.
Yeah, it's a funny one. It's almost like there's an army of Motorhead fans that are a certain age, that's when they were around. There were these 4 or 5 albums. This is their favorite one. They came of age with that album. Boom. Set, match, point, whatever, right? It's like, and same with Headless Cross and Headless Cross actually did quite well in Germany and whatnot. It was kind of a hit album, and I just don't get the love for Headless Cross. But I do remember at the time, this was the big comeback album. Everybody loves this album. This is Mickey D's first big album with the band, and this is a really good, ferocious album that is almost like the start of how awesome they became later. But this kicks it all off, and this is a lethal, good, heavy, well recorded album for them bastards. So, all right. So are we done? Are we? Let us know what you guys think in the comments. This has been a contentious one, and I think we covered a lot of ground here. But let us know in the comments below what if we're right on this one, or what your favorite Motorhead album is. Of course, we've got a Patreon situation as well too, and Marco's done a great job of keeping that community discussing a lot of really cool things, and we're actually putting those on as shows on YouTube as well. So join us on Patreon. It'd be great to get that support. But yes, also comment below, and until next time, go play some Motorhead.
That's it, dude.